The October pasture stretched out, beaten brass and gold under the pale sky. A rusted wire fence divided the sweeping landscape, marking a boundary older than anyone standing on it. Wyatt cut the engine on the John Deere. The heavy machine shuddered to a halt, releasing a faint puff of diesel smoke into the dry, crisp afternoon air. He sat in silence, his weathered flannel shirt blending into the rural backdrop. A quiet man, accustomed to the slow, relentless rhythm of the solitary land he worked. The silence broke. 3 immaculate black Range Rovers tore down the far side of the fence line, kicking up a violent storm of caliche dust before skidding to a halt. A woman stepped out of the lead vehicle. Elena. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled against the chaotic wind, she radiated urban authority. Her designer heels sank slightly into the unforgiving dirt. She surveyed the rusted tractor and the man on it with a cold, calculating gaze, entirely unimpressed by the surroundings. "Hey, Flannel," her voice carried over the fence, sharp and impatient. "That rust bucket of yours is trespassing on my future commercial development. Ride it back to your trailer." Wyatt did not turn around. He remained perfectly still, letting her words hang in the heavy air. The insult dissolved against his absolute, unnerving composure. Elena waited for a reaction, her irritation mounting. Instead of arguing, Wyatt simply reached forward, his calloused fingers turning the ignition key. The old engine roared back to life. Without a single backward glance, he steered the tractor toward the horizon. Elena was left standing in the settling dust, a silent dismissal she had never experienced before. Hundreds of miles away in a high-rise office in Dallas, Garrett Pike signed the survey order for Comanche Springs. His golden pen moved with absolute, corporate finality. The next morning in Cedar Hollow arrived bright and cold. It was the kind of Texas autumn that carried the sharp, nostalgic scent of dry mesquite and wood smoke. Inside the Dusty Bell Diner on the corner of Main and Pecan, the atmosphere was warm. Windows fogged from the hot griddle, and local men in feed caps filled the booths. A bell rang over the entrance door. Elena walked in, carrying herself with the unmistakable air of someone who had never in her life been told to wait for a table. She took the premium booth by the window, setting down a paper cup of gourmet coffee. She opened her laptop, her expression hardening as she checked the time. Her phone buzzed on the table. She answered before the second ring, her voice immediately filling the quiet diner with a sharp, commanding Dallas tone. "Closing Vista Larga inside 90 days, yes," Elena spoke rapidly, ignoring the quiet surroundings. "Tell Boyd if he wants the easement language tightened, he can fly down himself." At the far end of the wooden counter, a handsome man in a faded flannel shirt was quietly cutting pancakes into small pieces for a little girl with a brown braid. Wyatt did not look up from the plate. He did not need to. The moment her loud, impatient voice echoed across the room, he recognized it instantly. His daughter, Ivy, paused with her fork in hand, looking toward the window. The contrast between the city executive's noise and the father's quiet sanctuary was absolute. A second call came through just 3 minutes later. Elena answered. It was Garrett Pike, the chairman of Voss Meridian, calling directly from his Dallas high-rise. Garrett's voice leaked faintly from the phone receiver, low and silken. He instructed her to handle the neighboring parcel with extreme prejudice, offering 8 figures if necessary. "We need that water easement clean before the bond rating comes through," the chairman's voice pressed, demanding absolute compliance in securing the crucial natural resource. Elena rolled her eyes at her own reflection in the foggy window. "Garrett, it's a hick with a tractor. I'll have his signature on your desk by Friday." Ending the call, she stretched her shoulders, attempting to ease the corporate tension. She glanced around the rustic diner, and her sharp eyes suddenly caught a familiar shape. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. 1 second of realization. Her mouth did not change shape, but the tips of her ears went the faintest shade of pink. Instead of retreating, Elena stood up. She smoothed the front of her navy blazer and walked over to his booth, deciding to confront the situation with polished authority. She stopped beside his table. Wyatt did not offer his name. He simply took a slow sip of black coffee, looking at her over the rim of the heavy ceramic cup. Elena pivoted seamlessly into her professional smile, the precise, expensive expression she had paid an executive coach $8,000 to perfect. "I'd like to discuss your property line." Wyatt set the cup down with a soft, definitive thud against the wood. "Property line's been there since 1887, ma'am. Hasn't moved." She placed a thick, cream-colored card on the table. Dark blue ink. No graphic. Then, she turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. Ivy reached over, picked up the card with small fingers, and turned it upside down, squinting at it as if the expensive paper might make more sense that way. Wyatt gently took the card from his daughter. He slid it into the front pocket of his faded flannel shirt without bothering to read a single letter. That night, the air grew incredibly still. Wyatt stood on the cedar porch of his white frame house, looking out over the dark expanse of his land. Across the creek, the bright headlights of surveying trucks swept slow, methodical patterns through the Vista Larga pasture. The silent invasion had already begun. The following morning, Elena sat in her dimly lit motel room in Cedar Hollow. The harsh blue light of her laptop screen illuminated her tense features. Bypassing her assistant, she accessed the county database directly. Her manicured fingers typed the coordinates of the adjacent property into the search bar. The search results populated instantly: Hartley Cattle Company. 14,000 acres. Last appraisal, $118 million. Sole owner, Wyatt A. Holloway. Elena read the screen 3 times. The color drained completely from her face. Her own arrogant words, "future commercial development," echoed mockingly in her memory. Her phone vibrated on the mattress. Garrett Pike was calling. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly turned the phone face down, letting it ring out in silence. At exactly 6 in the morning, the corporate surveyors crossed the rusted fence line. A bright white flag was driven firmly into Wyatt's side of the property. Wyatt was already awake. He had been up since 4:30, sitting on his dark porch with black coffee, watching the autumn sky turn from charcoal to peach. Seeing the intrusion, he set his cup down. He walked out toward the boundary line, calm and unhurried, his heavy leather boots stirring up small puffs of caliche dust. He stopped 20 feet from the survey foreman, his posture relaxed but absolute. "Gentlemen, you're on Hartley land. I'll need you to step back across that fence." The foreman called Dallas. 20 minutes flat, Elena arrived in a cloud of dust, wearing her city blazer and brand-new cowboy boots that had not yet learned the dirt. She approached with corporate authority. "Mr. Holloway, my crew has authorization from the seller. If you dispute the line, I suggest you take it up with the county." Wyatt said nothing for a long beat. He slowly took out his cell phone and dialed. "Sheriff Bender? I've got 6 men on my property. Appreciate a deputy." 12 minutes later, a county cruiser the color of dried mud pulled up. Sheriff Tom Bender stepped out, settling his uniform hat with a weathered hand. The sheriff walked straight past Elena as if she were invisible. He stopped squarely in front of Wyatt. "Morning, Mr. Holloway, sir. What have we got?" Elena registered the word, "sir." She stood frozen in her stiff blazer, completely powerless as the sheriff quietly ordered her corporate crew to pack their equipment and leave. After the trucks vanished down the road, Elena did not get back into her Range Rover. The harsh corporate armor seemed to fracture in the quiet air. She walked slowly toward the boundary line, placing both hands flat on the top rail of the rusted fence. Her expensive boots were officially covered in dust. Wyatt walked over and joined her. He did not gloat. He simply stood beside her, looking out at the same stretch of golden grass. "Why does the sheriff call you sir?" she asked, her voice entirely stripped of its Dallas arrogance, revealing a genuine, quiet confusion. Wyatt kept his eyes on the horizon. "Because his mother was my third-grade teacher. That's how it works out here." From the porch of the main house, little Ivy waved at her. A small hand, accompanied by a small, unguarded smile. Before her corporate instincts could stop her, Elena raised a hand and waved back. The rigid line between buyer and holdout blurred for a single moment. That evening, the local lawyer drove up the long gravel road to Hartley. She carried a weathered leather binder tightly under her arm. She and Wyatt sat on the porch in the cooling blue light of dusk. She placed the heavy binder on the wooden table between them. She spoke softly, revealing that Pike was leveraging her son's career to force her off the case. Wyatt nodded once, accepting that he was now legally entirely alone. 3 days later, Elena returned to Hartley. She did not bring a tablet, a trifold contract, or a corporate assistant. She carried only a plain manila folder. Inside was her own company's draft of the Vista Larga purchase agreement, which she had spent the entire night reading line by line. Hidden deep within the legal jargon, she had found the clause. A quiet paragraph granting Voss Meridian the absolute right to redirect the spring's flow after closing. Wyatt was sitting at the worn kitchen table when she walked through the open front door. He did not ask why she was there. He simply stood up, took a heavy ceramic mug from the shelf, and poured her a cup of black coffee. He slid it across the wooden table. Elena set the folder down. She did not open it. She looked at him, her corporate armor entirely abandoned. "If I told you the deal I signed would dry up your land within 5 years," she said, her voice steady but hollow, "would you believe me?" Wyatt looked at the closed folder, and then back up to her face. He showed no surprise, only a deep, quiet recognition. He pushed the coffee cup a fraction of an inch closer to her. "I'd believe you were finally starting to see it," he answered. Small, barefoot steps padded into the room. Ivy walked in, holding a sugar cookie wrapped in a napkin, and silently held it out to the city woman. Elena took the cookie in both hands, holding it as carefully as if it were glass. "Thank you, Ivy," she said, her voice entirely devoid of the corporate boardroom. After the coffee was gone, Wyatt did something he had not done with another adult in 4 years. He stood up and pulled a heavy barn jacket from its peg. "Come on," he said softly, holding the heavy wooden door open for her. "I want to show you something." They walked the long way around the south pasture, passing an old metal windmill that still pumped rhythmically under the vast, quiet sky. At the top of the rise behind the barn, beneath a massive, ancient live oak, sat a simple piece of gray granite. No heavy inscriptions, just a name and 2 dates. A small clay pot of bluebonnets rested at its foot. Wyatt looked down. "My wife knew this land better than I do. She used to say, land doesn't belong to anyone. People belong to land," Wyatt said, his voice carrying easily over the autumn wind. Elena looked down at the dry grass. She quietly admitted that her father had raised her to view land as nothing more than a slow stock to be leveraged. They walked back toward the barn in silence. Ivy was there, carefully brushing the flank of the old Palomino mare with both her small hands. Wyatt and Elena stopped at the fence, watching the child. Neither spoke. The immense distance between their two worlds quietly shortened by a single step. The Voss Meridian boardroom in Dallas sat on the 43rd floor. It was a cold expanse of glass and oiled walnut, designed to intimidate. Sitting in her usual seat at Garrett Pike's right hand, Elena looked out at the downtown skyline. For the first time, it looked small. Garrett opened the meeting by announcing a compressed timeline. He wanted 30 days to close Vista Larga and file the spring diversion application. He smiled a practiced, hollow smile, assuring the board that they had plenty of methods to handle any noisy neighbors who got litigious. Elena kept her face perfectly still. She informed the board that without the Hartley signature, the entire easement was invalid. Garrett's smile did not waver. He dismissed the holdout as just a sentimental man with a dead wife, confident he could be bought or broken. He stood up and walked slowly around the long table. As he passed Elena's chair, he laid a heavy, condescending hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," Garrett said smoothly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "The grown-ups are handling it now." Elena did not move. It was the exact sentence she had used on Wyatt. She absorbed the familiar cadence of corporate contempt like a physical blow. After the meeting ended, she stood alone in the women's restroom, staring into the bright mirror for a long time without turning on the water. Still standing in the corporate restroom, Elena pulled out her phone. She dialed the local county lawyer directly, completely off the corporate record. "Tell me," Elena said softly into the receiver, her eyes locked on her own reflection. "What kind of man is Wyatt Holloway?" There was a pause of exactly 3 seconds. The lawyer's voice came back calm and certain. "The kind you don't try to fool twice." That night, Elena did not pack a bag. She did not call her assistant. She simply drove south, leaving the bright towers of Dallas behind her in the dark. She drove for 3 hours through the silent Texas night. At 1 in the morning, her headlights swept across the heavy metal gate of the Hartley Ranch. Wyatt was still awake. Inside the warmly lit tack room of the barn, he had been quietly repairing a broken leather strap on Ivy's small riding saddle. Seeing the headlights through the window, he set his tools down. He walked out into the cool night air and slowly pushed the iron gate open. Elena stepped out of the vehicle, leaving the keys in the ignition. "I'm not here as a buyer, Mr. Holloway," she said. Wyatt simply nodded. "Then come in." As she stepped onto the gravel, her phone vibrated. A warning message from Garrett Pike appeared on the screen, indicating she needed to back away immediately. Her hand closed tightly around the phone. Wyatt saw the sudden shift in her face. He did not ask questions, he only tipped his head toward the safety of the porch. They sat on the dark porch until the sky went gray. In the morning, they drove together to Cedar Hollow Feed and Tack, a long, low building on the edge of town. Inside, the air smelled of bulk oats and leather. Hollis Vance, the 78-year-old owner, looked up when the bell jangled. Hollis looked past Wyatt, fixing a slow, assessing gaze on Elena. "This the Dallas lady I've been hearing about?" Wyatt simply nodded. Hollis wiped his hands on his apron. He told Elena that her chairman had come through years ago, and when Wyatt refused to sell, Pike promised to find another way. Elena did not flinch. She held the old man's eyes steadily. "Mr. Vance, do you know what kind of way he meant?" Hollis smiled very slightly. Without a word, he gestured for the two of them to follow him into the dusty back room of the shop. The back room smelled of old paper and oil. Hollis crossed over to a tall, green vintage safe, spinning the heavy brass dial with practiced hands. He pulled open the heavy door, reached past a stack of old sale records, and withdrew a brown envelope, its corners soft from age. Inside was the only surviving photocopy of a corrupted government transcript from 2019, detailing Pike's contingency plan to seize the land through eminent domain abuse. Hollis handed the envelope to Wyatt. Wyatt, in turn, handed it to Elena. Her fingers closed around the paper. It was the absolute proof she needed. On the drive back to Hartley, the cab of Wyatt's 1998 Ford truck was thick with a heavy, contemplative silence. Wyatt drove with one wrist resting easily on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the familiar Texas road without rushing. At the second cattle guard, he eased the heavy truck to a complete stop, letting the old diesel engine idle loudly. He turned to Elena, offering her an absolute way out. She could return the paper, go back to Dallas, and sign the deal. Nobody would blame you, Wyatt said softly. Elena looked down at the weathered brown envelope resting safely on her lap. She did not look up immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but entirely unwavering. "I'd blame me." Wyatt nodded exactly once. He reached down and shifted the heavy truck back into gear. "Then we go to Austin on Monday." It was the first time in 3 weeks of tension that he had used the word "we." Elena registered it silently, looking out the passenger window. When they pulled into the Hartley driveway, little Ivy came running from the barn, wrapping her arms around Elena's waist in a warm, welcoming hug. Wyatt watched from the porch steps, his hands resting in the pockets of his flannel shirt. The boundaries had been entirely redrawn. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Wyatt's Ford truck ate up the miles, the vast, arid Texas landscape slowly transitioning into the rolling hills surrounding Austin. They pulled into downtown, the state capitol dome rising high above the modern, corporate skyline, a stark reminder of old, established authority. The law offices of Marchetti and Boyd occupied the top floor of a prestigious stone-faced building just blocks away from Congress Avenue. Theo Marchetti, a sharp, experienced Caucasian man with rolled sleeves, greeted them in his corner office, instantly grounding the urgent situation. Wyatt placed the weathered brown envelope from Hollis Vance on Theo's desk. Elena watched, knowing this was the point of no return. A heavy silence settled in the room for 90 seconds. Theo read the transcript photocopy, his professional expression hardening into a dangerous focus. Theo set the paper down on his leather blotter, looking up at Wyatt. "Wade," he said softly, "this is more than enough. This ends them." Elena took a sharp breath. "Mr. Marchetti, if I submit internal documents as a cooperating witness, can we file this Tuesday morning?" Theo locked eyes with Elena, assessing her commitment. He slowly lifted the receiver of his office phone. "We file Tuesday morning. All of it." That night, they stayed at a quiet hotel on West 6th Street. At 10 o'clock, Wyatt knocked on the door of Elena's room, holding out a green glass bottle of well water. At exactly 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the heavy wooden doors of the Travis County Civil District Court swung open. Theo Marchetti was the first attorney through the entrance, carrying a thick leather briefcase with absolute professional precision. He approached the clerk and simultaneously filed 3 documents: Wyatt's civil complaint, Elena's sworn affidavit, and a sealed packet of internal corporate emails. The legal filings became a matter of public record by 10. By noon, the Dallas business press had published the devastating story. Panic swept through the financial sector. Voss Meridian lost 41% of its market capitalization in a matter of hours. An emergency session was convened in the Dallas boardroom at 2 o'clock. The atmosphere was completely fractured. Garrett Pike stood at the head of the long walnut table, his previous arrogance replaced by cold, cornered fury. The board of directors did not hesitate. They voted 7-1 to remove Garrett from his position as chairman, effective immediately. Garrett cast the single dissenting vote for himself, watching in silence as the corporate empire he built turned against him. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, federal authorities officially opened a comprehensive corporate fraud and conspiracy file. Wyatt and Elena walked out of the courthouse together into the slanted, golden afternoon light. They crossed Congress Avenue side by side. They did not hold hands, but the distance between them had fundamentally changed. They found a small coffee shop with an old tin ceiling. Sitting by the window, Elena placed her hand flat on the wooden table. Wyatt rested his rough hand just inches from hers. "What happens to you now?" he asked quietly. Elena looked down at the wood grain. "I don't know. But I'm not going back to that office as the same person." Wyatt looked out at the street. "There's room at Hartley if you need to think for a while. The spare cabin is empty." On the long drive back to Cedar Hollow, her phone rang. It was the board's outside counsel, placed on speaker in the quiet truck. The voice formally offered her the interim chairman seat, doubling her salary to steer Voss Meridian through the incoming cleanup. She ended the call smoothly. "I'm considering whether I want to spend 10 years undoing what Garrett built, or do something I haven't done yet." Wyatt did not ask her what that something was. He simply nodded, keeping his hands on the wheel as they drove toward the dark silhouette of the hill country. For 2 weeks, Elena stayed in the small tin-roofed cabin behind the main house at Hartley. She abandoned her corporate suits, wearing jeans and the cowboy boots Wyatt had quietly placed by her door. By the end of the first week, she was drinking coffee on the main porch every morning with Wyatt and Ivy. On a quiet Thursday, Ivy decided it was time to teach the city woman how to tie a real cowboy knot.
Where do you think it came from?
"2 loops, Miss Elena," the little girl instructed seriously, guiding the thick rope around a wooden fence post. Elena laughed. It was a clear, open laugh she did not remember making before, her head tipping back slightly. Wyatt watched from the kitchen window, holding his coffee mug, completely captivated by the sound. He stood entirely still, watching the harsh edges of her corporate past dissolve into the Texas air. The second Monday arrived. Sitting on the cabin porch, Elena opened her laptop for the first time in days. With a few deliberate keystrokes, she formally declined the chairman's seat, permanently closing the door on her old life. In place of the chairman's seat, Elena announced the founding of the Voss Meridian Land Trust. It was a non-profit conservation foundation chartered to protect family ranches from corporate acquisition, funded by her whistleblower award and the liquidation of her Dallas penthouse. The grand jury formally indicted Garrett Pike on the 23rd of October. The legal proceedings were swift and unrelenting. He was remanded to home confinement pending trial. His Vista Larga shell entity completely collapsed inside a single week. During the hearings, Hollis Vance was called as a witness. He wore his old Stetson and a tie his late wife had picked out for him 40 years before. Sitting in the witness stand, Hollis answered the federal attorney's questions in short, plain, undeniable sentences. When the old man stepped down from the stand, Wyatt was waiting for him in the quiet marble hallway outside the courtroom. Hollis walked over and placed a weathered, heavy hand on Wyatt's broad shoulder. "Eleanor would have been proud, son," Hollis said, his voice thick with decades of shared history. Wyatt simply nodded, his throat too tight to form any words. The long battle to protect the land was finally over. Marisol Reyes, her son now safely employed and out of Pike's reach, finally opened the bottom drawer of her heavy file cabinet. Beneath the heavy deed history lay a single folded sheet of cream stationery. It was Eleanor's handwriting, a codicil written 6 months before the accident. Marisol drove out to the Hartley Ranch on a quiet Friday evening, carrying the delicate letter with the utmost care. She found Wyatt on the porch and placed the aged paper directly into his calloused hands without saying a word. Wyatt stepped inside and sat alone at the worn kitchen table. The silence of the house felt entirely different as he unfolded the page. There was a single line he had never seen before. "If I'm not here, Wyatt, find someone who can stand on this land without trying to own it." He read the quiet instruction twice. Then, he folded the letter with deliberate slowness and slid it safely into his flannel pocket. He walked back out onto the wooden porch, stepping into the cool, crisp air of early December. Elena was sitting on the top step. She was no longer a corporate executive, but simply a woman wrapped comfortably in a warm wool blanket. Beside her, little Ivy was pointing up at the darkening sky, gently teaching the city woman how to find the first winter stars. By the first week of December, the Vista Larga property was formally acquired by the newly established Voss Meridian Land Trust. The purchase price was $89 million, well below Garrett's ambitious target, but enough to satisfy the distressed seller's note. The entire expanse of land was legally placed under a perpetual conservation easement, ensuring it would never be paved over. Comanche Springs received a state-level protective designation. No commercial diversion well would ever be drilled into its ancient aquifers. The massive Austin Metropolitan Water contract was quietly reassigned to a coastal desalination project, exactly where it belonged. Elena moved out of the small cedar cabin during the second week of December, choosing a small rented house on the south end of town. The house featured a bright yellow door and an east-facing porch. She liked it, preferring to rebuild her life at her own pace. She was not entirely ready for what lay between the guest cabin and the main house. Wyatt understood this perfectly. He never pushed or asked intrusive questions. He gave her the space she needed to completely shed her Dallas past. When she came over for supper on Wednesday evenings, he simply set a third ceramic plate on the worn wooden table. On a clear afternoon, just days before Christmas, Wyatt was working along the fence line between Hartley and the acquired Vista Larga land. He carried a coil of new wire and a post driver, strengthening the boundary on the exact stretch where Elena had first insulted him in September. Elena appeared, walking down the dusty ranch road on foot. The tailored blazer and heels were gone, replaced by worn jeans and dusty cowboy boots. She carried 2 paper coffee cups from the Dusty Bell Diner, a quiet, functional offering for the cold winter afternoon. He took the coffee from her, their eyes meeting over the rims of the cups. No words were needed to acknowledge how much had changed. They worked together for nearly an hour, moving with a silent, efficient rhythm, rebuilding the structure of the protected landscape. Elena held the new wire taut against the fresh cedar posts, her manicured fingers now showing small, honest calluses from the labor. Wyatt drove the posts deeper into the hard caliche clay with steady, powerful strokes, building a barrier that was meant to last. When the last post was set, they paused, looking west toward the quiet flow of Comanche Springs. "It doesn't have to be anything yet, Elena," Wyatt said softly. "Land doesn't rush." The thud of small boots approached from behind. Ivy ran up, leading her horse, and slipped her small hands into both of theirs, physically bridging the gap between them. Christmas Eve descended on the Hartley Ranch, wrapping the old white frame house in a crisp, peaceful winter silence. Inside, a fire cracked steadily in the stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow across the worn wooden floors. Elena knelt beside a small cedar tree, carefully helping Ivy hang handmade ornaments. The corporate executive was entirely gone. Wyatt leaned against the kitchen counter, watching them in silence. For the first time in years, the house felt entirely alive. The heavy ring of the wall phone broke the quiet. Wyatt answered, recognizing the sharp, steady voice of Theo Marchetti on the line. Theo delivered the final legal update: the federal judge had denied Pike's last appeal. The Conservation Trust was officially bulletproof. Wyatt hung up the receiver with a quiet click. He walked back into the living room, carrying the absolute certainty of the news. He relayed the message softly to Elena. She closed her eyes for a brief second, exhaling the final, lingering weight of her Dallas past. Oblivious to the legal victories, little Ivy stretched up on her tiptoes, successfully placing a slightly crooked, painted wooden star at the top of the tree. Wyatt and Elena stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the firelight reflect in the child's eyes, surrounded by the undeniable safety of the ranch. The water of Comanche Springs ran cold and clear, just as it had for centuries before the state of Texas even existed. It moved steadily over the ancient limestone, completely indifferent to the corporate wars and human ambitions fought over it. The spring would keep moving long after the new cedar fence posts weathered and turned a pale, ghostly gray. It would easily outlast the steel wire, the property lines, and whatever temporary names were written on the county deeds. Back at the boundary line, Wyatt felt Ivy's small, warm fingers holding tightly onto his own calloused right hand. On Ivy's other side stood Elena, the corporate executive who had once stood on this exact line and tried to take it from him. Now, she was standing on it with him. She wore the same muddy boots, breathing the same cold air, watching the same eternal water. Wyatt did not let go of his daughter's hand. And on the other side, neither did Elena. They stood together in the crisp winter wind, silently connected by the child and the immense, quiet land beneath their feet. Some fences are built to mark exactly where a piece of land ends. Others simply mark where it begins. As the sun fully set over the newly protected Vista Larga, the golden light faded into a deep, peaceful twilight across the Texas landscape. Inside the white frame house, the kitchen was warm. The wooden table remained set for three, a quiet testament to a fractured family made whole. Out in the barn, the old green tractor rested in the shadows. It was a humble machine that had outlasted a $100 million corporate empire. Eleanor's handwritten letter now sat safely inside a glass frame on the mantel. Her final wish for the land had been perfectly honored. Elena sat comfortably on the porch, a wool blanket over her shoulders. She had traded a city of glass for a life of genuine substance. Out in the corral, Wyatt and Ivy walked the old Palomino mare together. Their quiet laughter drifted easily on the cold December breeze. At the property line, the heavy metal conservation sign stood firm against the wind, guaranteeing the ancient aquifers would never be drained. Comanche Springs continued its steady, eternal rhythm over the limestone rocks, untouched by human greed, flowing exactly as it was meant to. The vast expanse of the Hartley Ranch rested under a brilliant canopy of winter stars, safe, quiet, and completely free from the threat of tomorrow. Some stories end in destruction, but others end in preservation. The land remained, unbroken and unowned, silently holding the people who truly belonged to it.